You're watching Newswatch on WOAY.
As winter draws closer, one wild card meteorologists are closely monitoring for cold and snow potential is the polar vortex. Chief Meteorologist Chad Merrill sat down for an exclusive interview with a research scientist in this field of study. Check it out.
All right, folks, we have Dr. Simon Lee with us now. He has done his PhD research in the stratospheric polar vortex, so he knows a lot about the configuration of it and how it impacts our winter. Of course, there's a lot of talk right now with the Super El Nino going on and a lot of tropical forcing that there is going to be some extremes this winter. Some folks are saying lots of snow. You know, the overall theme is, though, we're going to have some anomalies this winter. And one thing that dictates what happens with these anomalies is what happens in the stratosphere, and specifically with the polar vortex. So, Dr. Simon Lee, can you give us an update right now as to exactly where the stratospheric polar vortex stands right now in its current state? Is it weak? Is it strong? And maybe some projections at least through the middle or end of December and perhaps the rest of the winter?
So right now, the vortex is actually in the seasonal buildup that we usually see at this time of the year. And actually over the next week or so, it's expected to become unusually strong, perhaps even record strong for the time of year. But this is really thinking several tens of miles up into the stratosphere. And where we'd really need to see those anomalies right now for an impact on our weather is much closer down to the troposphere where our weather takes place. And those anomalies have not yet quite made it down into the lower part of the stratosphere, which is fairly typical for early in the winter. We don't generally see that sort of exchange of dynamic variability until sort of January, February time. But then the forecast is actually quite interesting. So the prediction system run by the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, they run a very large ensemble of forecasts for 46 days. They run that every day. And this is a new prediction system for this winter. And what that's been repeatedly showing is an expectation for a weaker than normal polar vortex to develop in about the first or second week of December. And it's been a very persistent signal from these forecasts. And so that looks like that's the way the vortex is likely to evolve moving forward into December, at least if you believe the consistency that this one forecast system has been showing.
So would a weaker vortex imply colder outbreaks across the U.S.?
That's where the difficult part of the forecast comes from. So when we have a weaker polar vortex, what we typically have is the pattern in the North Atlantic, which is called the North Atlantic Oscillation, that's related to where the tropospheric jet stream is, which separates warm air and cold air. That generally turns into a more negative North Atlantic Oscillation, and the jet stream typically becomes wavier and shifts slightly more equatorward, which typically allows colder air to come out of the Arctic and influence mid-latitudes, places like the US during that time period. But it doesn't always take place in exactly that fashion. And certainly you can have a weakened polar vortex and still not really see significant cold air, and let alone snow in a specific region. So I think we really, moving forward, need to get the forecast in the stratosphere nailed on before we think too much about what happens in the troposphere.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for that insight. Of course, we will continue to follow trends in the stratosphere to see how that could impact our weather, especially in early December. But if you, the viewer, want to see more about our interview, we talked about how the Tonga eruption back in 2022 can actually have implications on the stratospheric polar vortex. That interview can be found on our website. Just click on the Weather tab. Chief Meteorologist Chad Merrill reporting for Newswatch.